Put on your sweats. No need to shave. Kick back and relax, because it's Philosophy Friday with Matthew Weiss, where we start off the weekend casual.
Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. I want to talk about level matching and why I don't do it when I mix. So the idea of level matching is that when we hear something as being louder, we tend to readily perceive it as being better. So if we process a signal and that signal ends up being louder than the original, we're psychologically going to interpret that as being better than the original, but that might not be true. So the concept is we take our source sound, be it our vocal, our bass, our guitar, our drums, whatever it might be, we take the processed version and we level match them so that they are the same in terms of their loudness, taking away that loudness factor, and then we're just comparing the qualitative differences to see which one really is better or worse, the original or the one that we processed. Now, it sounds really good in theory, but there are some major problems with this idea, and I want to go through the list, and I think it'll start to make sense why I don't recommend level matching as a typical practice when going through a mix. So the first one is that there's just a technical issue with you need a term of level. Not all level is the same. There is peak level, there is RMS level, and then there is all different types of RMS level. There's loudness units, full scale, which is Fletcher-Munson compensated RMS, and then there's different RMS windows. There's short-term RMS, there's long-term RMS. All those kinds of things are going to give you different results when you're actually matching the two signals. If you match two signals by peak, the signal that has the highest RMS value is going to get perceived as bigger, and so you're going to be hearing a louder version. And similarly, if you match by RMS, well, the more dynamic version is going to be more energetic, and so the one that's more dynamic is inherently going to sound better. So you are sort of chasing your tail just inherently off the basis of the fact that there's no standard for this kind of level matching. The second issue is that we're neglecting context, right? This is the idea of comparing our original with our new version, but when we're mixing, what's really important is how everything sits together. So for example, if I were to say set a snare in the mix, I set it to where I feel like it sounds best, and I listen and I go, oh, that sounds like it's the right level in the mix, it's the right balance in the mix, but maybe it's a little bit too dark, so I might add some treble. Now, level matched, I would have to turn that snare back down. Now the snare is going to not sound like it's at the right level in the context of the mix. It's going to end up sounding thin. That wasn't the point. The point was that the snare was at the right level, it just needed to be a little bit brighter. So there's not even really any use in level matching when you're talking about the context of the greater picture. The third is that level and loudness are not inherently the same. There are plenty of things that can affect perceived loudness that have nothing to do with level at all. Saturation and distortion will tend to make things appear louder even when they are at the same level as the original. So the question is, if level matching were to work, then wouldn't everything that's distorted ultimately always sound better? I don't think that that's true. Sometimes it's the case, but certainly not always. And so we're missing the fact that perceived loudness is not as simple as certainly not just level, and even Fletcher-Munson compensated level, which is certain frequencies that our ear picks up more readily. Number 4, it interrupts the workflow, right? If I'm in my zone mixing, and this really is probably the biggest one for me here, if I'm in my zone mixing and I'm setting my balances and I'm like, okay, this just needs to be a little brighter, this needs to be darker, let's put a little distortion on that, let's do this, I tend to move pretty quick once I get into my zone. If I have to stop and level match and check everything, rather than just acknowledge what feels good, then I'm going to interrupt my flow there. And it sort of brings me to number 5. It's ultimately a crutch that's going to make you think about the sound of something instead of the feel of something. Let's say you're making a mix and you start processing a source, whatever source it might be, and you start adding whatever kind of plugins or whatever else it might be, but all that happens at the end of the day is that ultimately the net result is just the source ends up being a little bit louder. So what? If you like that version better, yeah, maybe you took a round trip in order to get something just to be a little bit louder and that's all it needed, but you still got there. If it sounds better and it feels right to you, it doesn't really matter how you get there. What matters is that you get there. So this idea of going back and nitpicking over every kind of source, level matching to make sure that you really like every single change, all you're really doing is getting inside your own head. What you're not doing is paying attention to the way the music is hitting you and reacting to that. Now, I do understand a couple of cases where level matching makes sense. Level matching makes sense as a study tool. A lot of the times we do fool ourselves into thinking something is better simply because it's becoming louder. And I think training our ear to hear characteristics rather than loudness is important. Additionally, when we're comparing single sources to themselves, for example, like when we're mastering a record and the only comparison is the before and after of the 2-track of the mix, well, okay, then it might make a little bit more sense as well. But that said, we still have a lot of caveats going along with it. One of my least favorite things when I see mastering comparisons is when people compare the masters level matched. I don't think that that's a reasonable comparison, and I know that goes against common wisdom, but I don't think that it's a reasonable comparison because in reality, the level isn't matched. If one master is louder and the other master is quieter, that is a qualitative difference that actually has an impact on the way the record is received. And so it might not be the most important thing in the world. Maybe it's more important to one client than it is to another, but it's important to acknowledge that that difference exists. So when we're comparing the trade-offs, if the one that is louder inherently doesn't sound quite as big when it's level matched because it's less dynamic, that will almost always be the case, we still have to take into account the fact that at the end playback is going to be louder unless it's on some kind of a level match system. So in all of these cases, level matching doesn't really hold up as anything except for something that can sometimes inform us a little bit about the qualitative differences aside from loudness, and only to a certain extent. All right, folks, if you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification so you get notified. And if you really want to get better at mixing, learn how to mix without relying on techniques that probably ultimately don't even really work, you're going to want to join WeissAdvice.com and become a member. That's where you're going to get the tools, the understanding, and develop your ear to become confident and great at mixing. So check that out. The link is in the description below. And lastly, you know what we say here at Weiss Advice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.